Welcome to Horror Year, where every story is a journey into the unknown. If you're brave enough to face your darkest fears and uncover the most chilling tales, you've come to the right place. So, dim the lights, turn up the volume, and subscribe to Horror Year. Your journey into terror begins now. While he rubbed his sleepy eyes, John peered at the desktop clock on his computer. A little after 11. He leaned back in his chair, suppressing a yawn, and remembered earlier that day when his supervisor had instructed him to remain late to complete a crucial report. John slapped his face lightly, straightened, and struggled to keep his eyelids from drooping. Remain alert. Remain alert. It's practically done. All I have to do is stay up a little bit longer. He dragged his tired eyes across his desk, past the blinding white spreadsheet in front of him, and noticed the red-striped Peppermint next to his keyboard. He inspected the sweets wrapped in cellophane and took them up, remembering what he had acquired earlier that day. Desperate for some coffee, he'd entered the office break room and observed the peculiar gift basket on one of the tables. When he approached it, he removed a card with gold embossing that read, "Help yourself." He had meant to question one of his colleagues about the unique gift box, but he was looking around. Upon realizing that nobody was there, he shrugged, took a bite out of a peppermint candy for himself, got his coffee, and made his way back to his desk. That was several hours ago, and up until now he had completely forgotten about the sugary confection. This might be useful. He removed the peppermint leaf from its wrapping, took a bite, and leaned back to continue his job. He swirled the delicacy around with his tongue, and soon its delicious aromatic flavor filled his mouth. After finishing the report, he sent it to his supervisor and saved it, then took another look at the time. By now it was 11:30. John reclined back in his chair, satisfied and stretched, but then it dawned on him. He still had the peppermint in his mouth, firm and undissolved. John was curious and gave it a hesitant twirl in his mouth before clamping it between his teeth and biting down forcefully. The peppermint refused to yield and felt like a hard rock in his mouth, causing pain to flare in his molars. John realized, horrified, that no matter how hard he tried, his mouth would not open, and groped for a beautiful ashtray he never used nearby to spit it out. He had his mouth tightly pressed shut. Startled, and as fear began to creep in, he attempted, but was unable to separate his lips with his fingers. He reached for a tissue from a nearby dispenser and attempted to rub it against his lips, but was unable to part them once more. That's when he heard it. A break. He was momentarily distracted from his sealed lips by the sound, which was loud enough to demand his complete attention. He initially believed that his bite had permanently broken one or more of his teeth, but the cracking persisted. He heard a tiny cracking sound coming from his mouth. John just sat there listening for a moment. He felt fissures in the peppermint surface and a few little pieces missing as he curiously swung his tongue around it. However, that defies logic. Rather than cracking after being bitten, it ought to have cracked while... At that moment, he sensed it. Alternatively, they little projections that emerge from the peppermints inside, feeling like tiny spiky branches, or... He ran his tongue along one of the protrusions carefully. It jerked. Fear and revulsion washed over John as he gagged. He hurried to the restroom in the workplace and made every effort to crack open his mouth, but it remained closed. By now, the protrusions were writhing, and he could feel bits of candy remaining on his tongue in various pockets inside his mouth, most of which were broken. After turning on the bathroom faucet to its maximum volume and leaning over the sink to let the water spray over his lips, John grabbed some soap from the wall dispenser and gave them a relaxing massage. They refused to separate even now. John froze, feeling something move in his mouth while his lips were still under the stream of water. A prickly, multi-legged figure stood dead in the middle of his mouth, its clawed claws spread out against the walls and ceiling as it balanced there, like a half-opened umbrella in a tube, while pieces of the candy were now dispersed across the area. John felt dread rising in his gut and panic taking hold of his heart, making time seem to stop. His breathing became more labored, as ragged breath after ragged breath entered through his flaring nostrils. Initially, it appeared as though the monster was just standing there, waiting for anything. John felt it twist and head toward his throat as he took a breath. As he strained to force the foreign invader out of his tight lips, John choked uncontrollably. He tried to crush the object with his tongue, pushing against it desperately. But as if it had anticipated this, he felt it push back with unexpected force as it inched its way into the back of his throat, pressing against his tongue as it went. Now John was in a complete panic, attempting to split his lips open with his fingers. But despite his best efforts, they did not yield. He watched himself in the bathroom mirror as he clawed at his lips, crimson marks showing. At that moment, he had an epiphany and reached into his pocket, feeling around for a moment before extracting something he had always kept with him, but had never considered using for this purpose. He opened his closed fist and shook his hand. In the fluorescent light of the office restroom, his reliable pocket knife shone brightly as it lay folded in his palm. He flicked it open hesitantly. In the bathroom light, the razor-sharp blade gleamed like a polished mirror, taunting him to pick it up. I'm unable to do so. Now the thing was in the back of John's throat, making him choke and spit violently. His mouth was still closed, even though his body was trying its hardest to resist and drive the thing out. He gave the blade one more glance before putting it to his lips. Sighing with contentment, John reviewed the information on his computer screen before saving and forwarding it to his supervisor. Exhausted, he glanced at the clock in the corner of his screen, a little before 5. He shuddered slightly as comfort flowed into his exhausted muscles, causing him to stand up and stretch. With a growl in his stomach, John headed for his kitchen, stumbling in his shoes for the refrigerator. The sound of his doorbell rang as he was ready to open it. What? I haven't placed any recent package orders. Is there a guest? Nobody picked up the phone. He walked over to his front door and opened it cautiously. There was nobody in sight, and the front porch was abandoned. Something caught his attention from the corner of his eye on his doormat. John cast a downward glance. His heart skipped a beat and his blood ran cold. He glanced up while scrambling, looking everywhere for any indication as to who might have left this. However, nothing was in the area. No delivery truck was close by, and nobody could have possibly left it here. Gradually, John returned his gaze to the parcel that rested upon his doormat. His tongue lazily traced the scars on his lips, and when he came to a particularly deep and lengthy one that stretched lengthwise over his previously unbroken lips, his eye twitched. The recollection flooded his consciousness. The taste of it as he almost drowned in his own viscous crimson fluid, the strong scent of the disinfectant used in the restroom, and the sticky feeling of blood dripping from his destroyed mouth. The pain he felt from the sharp cut that eventually gave him access to his mouth was still fresh in his mind. He recalled reaching in and extracting the intruder, the monster. The way its spiny legs and stiff, thorny exoskeleton twisted and twisted as it struggled against his hand's hold. He recalled hurling it onto the bathroom floor and trampling on it until a deep green discoloration was all that was left. After that, he recalled falling against the sink, bandaging his wound with paper towels, and dialing 911. After that, the rest was kind of a blur. He only dimly remembered being almost forced to resign, and that there was no sign of the thing when he later looked for it in the lavatory. How he wanted so badly to just move on and forget that any of that had ever occurred to him. How he was being forced to undergo recommendations for psychological examination, and how he had found another job that allowed him to work from home. But he was unable to forget. And now, as his stomach growled again at the delicious smell drifting from the gift basket in front of him, John felt complete repulsiveness and treachery as the ghostly taste of peppermint assaulted his mouth. Nestled in a nest of crinkled green plastic grass were large, brightly colored rainbow swirl lollipops, enormous chocolate bars, and, of course, many peppermints wrapped in cellophane. Inside the basket, arranged perfectly in front of all the candies, was a single card with one word inscribed on it that was embossed in gold: Enjoy. And that brings us to the end of today's delightful story. I really hope it had you on the edge of your seat. If you liked this story, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It means a lot to me. And if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. There's always an exciting surprise waiting just around the corner, and you won't want to miss it. Do you have a spooky story to share or a fun idea for our next tale? Feel free to share in the comments below. I'm really curious to know what gives you the creeps the most. And as always, take care, keep exploring. And remember, sometimes the most chilling tales are the ones left untold. Catch you in the next one, if you're up for it.